All right, everybody. Oh, you are. Hello. Hello. Okay, everybody. Head on back to your seats. Sounds like you guys had some good conversations. Some people on my staff team asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said, "Have you even met me? I want to be a dinosaur." Um, and you know what? At 29, I still kind of want to be a dinosaur when I grow up. My name's Johanna, and I'm one of the pastors with the Chi Alpha group at OSU. And we are so thankful to all of you here at Seaside Assemblies of God for hosting us. Thank you so much. This is actually for us at OSU, the first fall retreat beach getaway we have ever had since we've re-pioneered the team, the Chi Alpha group there, starting about 3.5 years ago. U of O has done more fall retreats than this, but they're really excited to be back too, and it's just been a huge blessing that we've had a place where we can have our worship services and a place where we can eat and where we can all gather. So we're just really thankful for you. Thank you so much for your hospitality and your generosity with your space. Well, as I already said, my name's Johanna. And a few things to know about me is I met Jesus through a Chi Alpha group when I was a college student. And after that, started feeling this call to go into ministry and to help other college students know Jesus like I was helped to know him as a college student myself. Ever since I graduated college, I've been working in full-time campus ministry. This is my 8th year in campus ministry. Yeah, and I have been all over the place. I have been on 2 campuses in Washington. I've been down in Chico, California with Chi Alpha, and I've been here for 3.5 years, like I said, restarting up that OSU Chi Alpha group. I don't have any children or a husband, but I do have 3 adorable cats. And I would put pictures up, except I already have too many cute pictures. So you don't get to see my cats, but who you do get to see is that this past May, my godson Alika was born. He was actually born on my birthday, so he's my little birthday present. And if you hadn't said, oh, I was going to tell you you had to, but you did it yourselves, so thanks for that. He's a little sweetheart. I talked to him about Star Wars. His mom knows nothing about Star Wars, but someone's got to teach him. And something else to know about me is that I have 3 older brothers, and I grew up in a family that was not Christian, which is why I met Jesus in college. There were a lot of hard things in my family life growing up. There was quite a bit of mental illness in my family. There was some abuse going on. But I have one brother. He's the middle of my brothers, and his name is Ken. And there will be a picture of us. Look how cute I was as a baby. Look how cute he was as an 8-year-old. And he was like the person in my family who I always knew I could turn to. And there are pictures, I asked my mom for some pictures of us when we were kids, and almost all of them show me like following behind him. And that was kind of what it was like all my life growing up. I saw Ken as being like this role model for me and as like the person I wanted to follow after. He's someone who has always been able to see the good in people, no matter what. And he's someone who was very kind and who really tried to like mediate arguments in my family in a way that I really needed to see happen as a kid. And he was just kind of always there and always steady when I was growing up. And I had this really special relationship with him. He was the one who taught me how to throw a baseball, you know, like that stereotypical fathers take their kids out to learn baseball. My brother did that for me, and he was fantastic at baseball too. I learned to throw a ball. I learned to hit a ball from him. He would read me stories every night, as you can see him doing here, starting when he probably could barely read himself. Really, really close to kin. And he was really important to like the stability of my life growing up. But when I was about 14 years old, Ken had a mental breakdown and was taken to an inpatient hospital to figure out what was going on. And not too long after that, he let me know that he had gotten into meth, and that the mental breakdown was caused by that addiction, by him trying to get off. And for another few years, he went to rehab. He was doing a lot better. And then just before I graduated from high school, he got back on drugs, and he was in rehab again during my graduation, wasn't able to come, and then right after I went to college, he disappeared again. And today we're going to be talking about the story of the prodigal son. And for people who have been here this whole weekend, we've been talking about the prodigal son this whole time, but for those of you who haven't been here for this weekend, it's not really dependent on what we've talked about before. Today we're talking about the theme and the story of reconciliation. When we talk about the story in the church, a lot of times we put ourselves in the shoes of the prodigal son, or put ourselves in the shoes of the older brother, and I think that that's right and that's good, and that the father clearly does represent God in this story. But this isn't just a story of God's embrace of the lost and how we should celebrate. It's also a story of love, and it's a story of betrayal, and it's a story of reconciliation. And in this story, every person in the family needs to take steps in order to be reconciled. And so as we're supposed to follow after the example of Jesus, I think that we're also supposed to follow after the example of the Father in this. And so I'm going to be putting us actually in the shoes of all three of the major characters in this story, not just the sons, but also of the Father as we talk about this. And one of the central themes in this and throughout Scripture is that God's desire in our lives is that we be reconciled. And as we look at this passage, we're going to explore what has to be done for reconciliation to happen. So we're going to start in Luke 15, verse 11. And the whole passage is 11 through 32, if you like writing that in your notes, but we're going to kind of break it down as we go. So starting in verse 11, it says, "There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.'" And now I want you to turn to someone next to you and discuss the question. I want you to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the family of this prodigal son. Imagine you had a loved one scorn you and abandon you, which I imagine many of you have experienced that before. Imagine that, and share with each other what you would feel when you saw that person again. So go ahead and turn to your neighbors and answer this question to each other, and I'll call you back in a few minutes. Yep. And then you'll go back up. So. All right. It sounds like most people are finishing up. Um, so continuing in my story about my brother Ken. Um, During my first few years of college, Ken's absence kind of loomed over me. He, like I said, was like the person in my family that felt like a safe person to go to. And it kind of like destabilized everything that I thought my family life was. And helped, like, it made me start to realize like the areas in which it was very unhealthy, and Ken had kind of come in and created like stability for me. And my family was really kind of in chaos following him disappearing. And I was away at college, but I was noticing that even at college is like my parents wouldn't tell me things that were happening in my family that were a really big deal. And then one of my brothers would call up freaking out. And I didn't really know what to do because I wasn't present. But this kind of like calming, stabilizing factor in my family was suddenly gone. And in a lot of ways, I felt very betrayed and very abandoned by like the one person who I thought I could go to no matter what. It made it hard for me to engage in some relationships with new people I was meeting in college because they reminded me of him, and that hurt. And it even affected my ability to serve the Lord as I was just getting to know him. There were times when I was like asked to go on mission trips, and I was like, I don't know if I should go on the mission trip because if Ken shows back up, I would ditch the mission trip for him. And I don't want to commit to something unless I can commit to it fully. And so there was a lot in those first couple years that I was in college after he disappeared that felt really unstable. And I think that here in this passage, we need to imagine that the prodigal son's absence, the younger son's absence in this story, had a deep effect on his family. There's a good chance that you've heard that when the youngest son asks his father for his share of the wealth that his father had and the share of his land, that like, just like now, where if you're in someone's will and will inherit things from them, they have to die for you to get it. You've probably heard before that he's essentially wishing his father dead. Like, I wish you were dead so I could have your stuff. And that is a big deal, and that's very hurtful. But it's not the only element in which the youngest son is hurting his family. His family are people, his brother, his father, remember him taking his first steps? Like my brother Ken taught me to play baseball, probably his older brother taught him to play the games that local kids played. His older brother might have taught him how to farm, might have taught him how to tend to the cows and lambs on their property. Probably taught him a lot. He laughed with him, he cried with him, he played with him. They were probably very, very close, even more so than in our culture. Families were very tight-knit back then. And so his absence and his leaving and taking that property, it is an insult to his father. But it's not only an insult. If we're being honest, most of us would be deeply hurt if we were in the shoes of the older brother and father. And most of us would be afraid to accept him back. And as the prodigal son in this story is thinking about returning to his family, he probably was deeply aware that he had insulted and hurt his family and that they would be afraid to accept him back. And yet, if that younger son never came home, the family would never have been reconciled. That son didn't realize, I messed up horribly, but at least there's some place for me at home. Then there never would have been reconciliation from the harm that he had done. And so the first step of reconciliation we see in here is actually the younger son realizing, I have put myself in a really deep rut, and the only thing I can do is to go home. And we see also in the youngest son that he realizes that he isn't worthy to be his father's son. He realizes, I have hurt these people so badly, and I'm going to confess that to them, and I'm going to return. And him coming home, and him having this plan to be like, I sinned against you in heaven. Those are the steps that needed to be taken for reconciliation to happen, the very first steps that needed to happen. We're going to continue in the passage now with verse 20. It says, And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. And he ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. So now I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the prodigal son. Imagine that you are him. And again, like with that first question, I think all of us have been in his place before, of having messed up and known that we need to go back to the people we hurt and confess that we hurt them and ask for a place back. So imagine that you're the prodigal son. And what thoughts would you be thinking as your father responded the way the father did in this passage? And you can go ahead and shout out answers to me. What thoughts would be going through your head as your father embraces you? You'd feel loved. That's really good, Annie. Surprised, yeah. Feel undeserving, yep. Shocked. Confused. You'd feel really bad, yeah. That uncomfortable. Why would you feel uncomfortable?
Well, first of all, I'm on my knees in the dirt.
Physically uncomfortable because being on your knees in the dirt is weird. But also emotionally. All right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's fair to say that, like, that is not the expected response. You might be surprised, confused, uncomfortable, even like shocked by the love God is showing. When I was halfway through my sophomore year of college, we found out my brother Ken was in prison for drug use. Because one of my other brothers Googled him and found his name in prison registries. When I contacted him, I started sending him letters every single week, and he didn't respond for months. And eventually, he did answer after probably about 6 months, and he sent me a letter saying that he hadn't been responding to my letters because he was afraid. And I think that there is a very real fear in someone who knows they've done something wrong, that they will not receive compassion when they come back. There's a very real fear that as they've abandoned other people, those people will now turn their backs on them. And I think that, like the younger son, my brother was afraid because he, like the younger son, says, I do not deserve to be part of your family. Realize that in some capacity, his abandonment of our family meant that, in a way, he didn't deserve to be part of the family anymore. And yet at the same time, love transcends what people deserve. And this father looked upon his son, and it says, his father saw him when he was a long way off and felt compassion. And when I found out that my brother hadn't responded because he was afraid, and I'm not going to say I'm always perfect at receiving these attempts at reconciliation, but when I thought about Ken and I thought about who he was to me, I wasn't concerned with the fact that he had messed up. I just wanted my brother back. And part of the steps of reconciliation, one of the steps is that we, like the Father, need to be prepared to welcome back people we have loved who have hurt us. Because if the Father didn't embrace his Son, the family could never have been reconciled. And if I were unwilling to listen when my brother says he's deeply sorry for the ways he's hurt my family and he wants to come back, then my family could never be reconciled. And so in some situations, you might be this son who has harmed the family and needs to take the steps to come back. But in some situations, for reconciliation to happen, you, like the Father, need to embrace the son who has returned. You need to celebrate their return. The first time I got to be on the phone with my brother after he was in prison, I didn't even know he was going to call me, and I answered the phone, and he was like, "Hey, Fluffy," which he called me because of my hair. And I was so excited I didn't even know what to say, because it had been so long since I'd heard from him. And I think that the proper response in these situations, if we're to be like God calls us to be, is to be overjoyed and celebrate. To not see them for their sins against us, but to see them for a dearly beloved son, a dearly beloved brother, dearly beloved sister, dearly beloved daughter. There's one more person in this story. So we're going to continue in verse 25. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." But he, the older brother, was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." And I would really like to say that after my brother began to contact my family again, after my brother expressed to us how sorry he was and has been trying to do better, that my family was reconciled. But my family isn't reconciled yet. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that our oldest brother, the only person in my family who's older than my brother Ken, has a sort of complex of superiority. And he's been that way for a lot of our lives. But when Ken started contacting us again, his attitude was, well, I need to keep telling him what he did wrong because he was an idiot, not like me. And that's kind of consistently what it's been, is like as Ken tries to reach out to my oldest brother rebuffs him and rubs in his face that he's done things wrong. And he's angry, my oldest brother is angry that other people in my family are investing in Ken again. And he's deeply judgmental in his interactions with him. And while this isn't the only reason my family isn't reconciled yet as a whole, it is one of them. But I think that it's important also to look at my oldest brother with compassion, and to look at the older brother in this story with compassion. Because I think that it's likely that the older brother in this story, and my oldest brother, may be using this attitude of superiority as a defense mechanism. It hurts less to be abandoned by someone who you think of as less than you. It hurts less to have someone hurt you if you do not think that they were worthy to begin with. And it also, I think, defends the oldest brother, defends my brother, from having to face the fact that they could become like this younger brother. They could also fall. And in fact, they also have fallen. And I think that we can really get in this mindset when we think about reconciliation of, well, I wouldn't ever do that to someone, so why should I be okay with the fact that they did it? But the truth of it is that that is a defense mechanism. That is trying to separate ourselves from our own ability to be evil, and that's trying to protect ourselves from the fact that someone else has hurt us. And it's understandable, and there's reason to be compassionate about a person feeling that way. But ultimately, in order for a whole group of people to be reconciled, all parties have to participate. In order for my family to be reconciled, all of my brothers, myself, and my parents all have to participate in that reconciliation. In order for the family in this parable to be reconciled, the father and both sons have to participate in that reconciliation. And so if the older brother doesn't put aside his hurt and his superiority, the family can never be reconciled. And that's kind of an open end in this story. The father explains to the older son, why he was excited and celebrated the younger son coming back. But we actually don't find out how the older brother responds to that. And in here we see again a role of the father in this. The father goes to the person who is not ready to embrace the younger brother and tells him why it's important to do so, and says, look, this is your brother who was dead and is alive again. There's reason to celebrate. And in each person's response to their situations in this parable, Jesus reveals how our participation in reconciliation matters. We need, like the father, to be ready to embrace the lost returning. And that's the call that is being given to the older brother who's having trouble doing it, is you need to embrace the lost returning, even though you haven't yet. Sometimes when we talk about the story, we make it almost detached. We talk about like, well, this is about new believers or coming back to Christ. And that's true. It's not that it's untrue. But the way this story is portrayed is a deeply personal story of a family that has been broken and needs to come back together. And so a question that has to be answered in the story is, how do they embrace the youngest son returning? A question that needs to be answered in my life is, how does everyone in my family need to embrace Ken's return? And a question in each of your lives is, in a place where you have been hurt, or where your family or a group you're close to has been hurt, what does it look like to embrace the person returning? We also see that we need to change our ways and receive that embrace if we are the one who has caused the harm. It can be really hard to admit fault. It took the younger son in this story getting to a point where he wanted to eat pig's food for him to realize he needed to admit fault in return. And pig's food is gross, by the way. It's just kind of like everything thrown into a slop. It's gross. And it can also be equally hard to truly believe that you're loved after you return. Even as I was like sending letter after letter to Ken, he wasn't sure that I actually would accept him back. He was afraid that I wouldn't. And so if we are the ones who are transgressing in a situation, if we are the ones hurting someone else, we need to be ready to change our ways and receive the embrace of our loved ones. And we also need to put aside hurts and attitudes of superiority, even if they're defense mechanisms. Even if they feel like they're true, even if you look at someone and you're like, man, I really would never do that to someone else. No matter how true they feel, no matter how much they're protecting our feelings, we need to be ready to be vulnerable and put aside our hurts and superiority. And while I, today, as a person, as a sister, can be reconciled to my brother Ken, my whole family can't be reconciled until this happens. So as we close out, I want you to turn to a neighbor again, maybe the same neighbor you talked to before, and I want you to spend time thinking about your own family or another group that you're really close to that is fractured in any sort of way, that anyone has hurt anybody else. And I want you to think, where in your life are you hoping to see reconciliation? This reconciliation that God calls us all to have with each other and with Him. And in this situation, are you the younger son? Are you the person who hurt someone else? Are you the father who is already embracing the person coming back, but maybe needs to go talk to someone else about why they need to embrace them? Or are you the older brother who has defense mechanisms and is hurt and is not willing to accept the person back yet? And I want you to ask the question of what steps you need to take to be reconciled. And then I want you to pray for each other. So go through each of these questions. Where do you hope for reconciliation? Are you the younger son, the father, or the older brother? And what's one step you need to take to start this reconciliation? And then I want you to pray for each other. Anna's going to come up and she's going to play quietly in the background. And after you've had some time to pray over each other, we're going to close with one last song.